We're bringing back on private investigator Steve Fischer because he just posted online that a key piece of evidence in the Celeste Rivas Hernandez death investigation may potentially be destroyed. The Tesla, David's apparent car where Celeste's body was found. How is this possible, and what does that mean for the case? Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. I gotta say something. I cover a lot of these stories every day, and they're not easy. I can sometimes feel a little burnt out. I don't know if you feel the same way, but if you're asking how do you get away from that? How do you give yourself a little extra care when you are feeling that way? Self-care really should start at home. And that is why I want to talk about our sponsor, Cozy Earth, okay? So whether it's their luxury loungewear, their towels, their bedding, all of their products are great. They add indulgent, high-quality comfort to your life, and that feels good. Their bamboo pajama set, which I have, it is made with a soft stretch knit that sleeps cool. It's still cozy for winter nights. It's amazing. Their classic cuddle blanket is like the softest I've ever owned. Maybe a good gift for Valentine's Day. It's coming up. Plus, Cozy Earth has a 10-year warranty, so their comfort is going to last you a decade. Share a little extra love this February. Wrap yourself or someone you love in comfort. Head on over to CozyEarth.com. Use code LAWandCrime for up to 20% off. In our continuing coverage of the David case and whether there's going to be an arrest and charges in connection with the death of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez, whose decomposed body was found in a car allegedly registered to David Anthony Burke, while we have talked about a lot of different components in this case in the investigation, you know what we haven't addressed recently? The car itself, the Tesla that was found abandoned in the Hollywood Hills with Celeste's body inside. It was found after it was towed away to a tow yard. Now, the reason I want to focus on it right now is our friend Steve Fischer just posted a lot about this, okay? And yes, this is a very important piece of evidence in this investigation. So before I bring on Steve Fischer to talk about this, and remember, Steve is the private investigator who was hired by the owner of the property where David had reportedly been staying, which was apparently near where that Tesla was found. Let me read you what Steve recently posted on X, okay? David's Tesla, the vehicle in which Celeste Rivas Hernandez was found, was held by LAPD for only 48 hours to process evidence. After that, it was returned to the impound lot for David to retrieve, which he had not done until today. The Tesla was scheduled to go to auction tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., and I had planned to attend and inspect it. However, in the final hours before auction, David, or someone with power of attorney acting on his behalf, picked it up. When I checked last week, the storage fees were approximately $10,500 as the vehicle had been released and available for pickup since September 10th, before Celeste had been identified. I hope just the thought of that vehicle haunts David and anyone else that knew Celeste was in the trunk for the rest of their lives. Hashtag David, hashtag Celeste Rivas Hernandez. Then in another post, it's the same here except if the value is over $4,000, then they have to hold it for longer, and there's a longer process because it had Texas plates. There's another post. The vehicle was held by LAPD from September 8th to the 10th under a 22655.5 evidence hold, then transferred to a downtown LA impound on September 10th. That's why it now shows false for on hold. I attached the auction listing, which appeared several weeks ago. When Steve was asked if it was taken by LAPD prior to the auction, Steve responded no. And in another post, Steve said, David's Tesla, which held the remains of Celeste Rivas Hernandez, was released to an individual who presented notarized paperwork authorizing the vehicle's transfer. I verified this. That person then transferred ownership into their own name. I can't disclose the new owner's identity without violating the rules of my DMV access as an investigator. This is also why I always redact license plate numbers, even when they're publicly known. As a licensed investigator with direct DMV access, if I have run that plate number, I have to redact it, even if it's public knowledge, since there is a group that thinks I'm trying to hide the plate number, even though they know it. It's clear this was a calculated move to get the car out of public view and out of David's name. I wouldn't be surprised if it's about to be crushed. Hashtag David, hashtag Celeste Rivas Hernandez. And then also Steve wrote, once it's released by LAPD, it's no longer evidence. They have documented everything, taken prints, DNA, photographs, etc. Once they release it, the chain of custody is broken. They can't hold it forever. This is actually standard protocol. Now again, the reason this all matters is no one has been arrested, no one has been charged in connection with Celeste's death, with the concealment of her body in any way. David, by the way, has not officially been named a suspect, and he too has not been charged or officially implicated, even though there are reports right now that grand jury is hearing evidence. So let's talk about this. All right, so now let me bring on Steve Fischer back in the show. Steve, good to see you. Thanks, as always, for taking the time. I know you're very busy. How did you find this out about the Tesla, for just to put a little bit of clarity on this?
Yeah, so I've been tracking it pretty much since day one, since they picked it up at the impound yard, just to see, because that was the kind of a nexus of our, investigation. It was the house and the car. You can track that through the system, and they kept it for 2 days, which I know a lot of people are making a big deal out of that, thinking it should have been kept, but that's pretty typical because it's not an instrument. It's crime scene location is what it is. So it wasn't really evidence as far as nobody thought that the car killed her. So they processed it, and I just kind of watched it and, ended up back in the impound yard and curious to see what their move would be, whether to pick it up, when to pick it up, what to do with it at that point, because it's a kind of a tricky situation.
Just to put a point on that, I mean, it is the scene of where her body was found, and processing it for 2 days. In your experience, is that a thorough amount of time to actually process it for what? For DNA, for fingerprints, for any kind of evidence that's left behind, to give any indication about when she was put in the car, who might have been in that car? Because again, people who don't know, they said 48 hours and then you release it. That doesn't seem right. I mean, couldn't they have held on to it for longer? And was there not even a possibility to hold on to it and, until there's actual charges?
Well, if they thought that the Lexus actually was, the Tesla was actually used in the crime to actually kill her, then they could hold it through trial. But this is more of a location, where she ended up. So what they do is they'll take it, and then they're allowed to hold it as long as it takes to do the forensic evidence of it. And listen, LAPD is a huge agency, and they do have a whole forensic center. And if you think about it, it's in the scope of things, of crime scenes, it's not the biggest location in the world. So I think their techs do have the ability to go in and do the DNA, all the fingerprinting, 3D imaging of the entire space of the vehicle, and it didn't shock me. And those units, operate 24 hours. So I think well, if it goes to trial, we'll see that they did a very thorough examination of the vehicle, I think.
I read your posts, and I know you can't reveal the identity of the person who ended up picking up this car, but let me just ask you this: were you surprised by who it was?
No, not necessarily. I mean, we figured. I figured it would be somebody that is known to him, and there was a group of 5, 6, 7 people that were around a lot. And I think just because of the length of time that we knew she was in there from the beginning, we knew it had to be at least a month or so because of the tow reports. So you just figure somebody else had to know what was going on, and then also just even not stopping the tour or having a statement. It was all very curious. So I don't think that one person would have the ability not only to do that, but also just to not say anything to somebody else. I feel like other people had knowledge of at least she was in that car.
And just to be clear, at this point, if you're saying the car was processed and then it was picked up, what do you believe is happening right now with that car? Do you think the idea of whoever picked that car up, wherever that car is right now, do you think it's because, hey, it's a great car, we wanted to be able to use it again, or do you believe that it's actually being destroyed at this point, and if so, for what purpose?
Yeah, so my personal opinion, and it's just my personal opinion, is that they're probably going to destroy that car. So what happened was it was, went through the process of where it crossed the 90 days or whatever it was before the vehicle, because it had a value over $4,000 to go to auction. They went through the whole process of transferring the ownership. And then in the afternoon, right before it was going to auction the next morning, and I talked to the impound yard. Somebody came in with notarized power of attorney signed by David, because he was the only registered owner of the vehicle, to release that vehicle to this person. And they paid the impound fees, which were around 10 grand at that time, and released the vehicle. And then just hours later, that person obviously had bill of sale on the car too, because they went to DMV and they transferred it. And it now actually has, I know who the new owner is, but which I can't disclose because DMV laws, but it now has California plates. But I think that's just a technicality to get it to where that person can dispose of the vehicle, probably. Just my guess. I don't see why they'd want it.
And just to be clear, if I wasn't clear before, that the person who purchased it, right, that bill of sale, DMV, this is somebody, I know you can't identify but this is somebody you weren't surprised by who purchased it? And apologies for Words in your mouth.
I didn't know this person. I didn't know that name was not familiar to me before this. And I'll say it's not somebody they can tie right into David, but they obviously know somebody, either David or his legal team, or they know somebody because they had to get David's notarized signature, giving this person power of attorney to get the vehicle out of impound. The title transfer, the ownership transfer did not happen at the impound yard. They just had to get it out first and pay those impound fees. But they had notarized paperwork from Dave, signed by David himself, saying this person was acting as his agent to do that. So there's some relationship somewhere. I know who they are, but I don't know what their role in their, David's world is.
I'm going to ask you a very specific question. A lot of people wondering, nobody knows where David is since he was left the tort. There is a question about what David knows at this point, how much he's involved in whatever's going on. Is this notarized paperwork something that he would have had to sign after the car was found, after Celeste's body was found, or is this a piece of paperwork that he gave a lawyer or a manager years ago and said, whatever decisions you need to make, keep me out of it, you just do something on my behalf? I know that's a really tricky, specific question, but I think it does become important in terms of what his knowledge is, in terms of what's going on right now.
No, these impound yards, they have paperwork that if the registered owner is not going to be able to do it, it's specific to that transaction. So this was not a broad power of attorney that was signed a long time ago. This was something that was specific to releasing that vehicle that day to that person who was acting as an agent for David, signed by David.
And in terms of the importance of this car, we've talked before about how it's being reported. There's a grand jury that's been impaneled to hear evidence in connection with Celeste's death. It hasn't been obviously confirmed by authorities, but assuming that's happening, how big a role do you think that Tesla plays in terms of, it's not just, we cover cases before where there's a dead body that's found in the woods, and sure, the woods become important, but how much do you think that this Tesla will be a key piece of the evidence, a key piece of the puzzle as to who was involved in what capacity?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a super important piece of evidence because they're going to say, she was in this vehicle for an extended period of time. That can be proven, I mean, we already know that from the medical examiner statements that it appeared she was in that vehicle for an extended period of time. LAPD has said that. So the fact that he never filed a report that the car was stolen, and when they can backdate this to figure out approximately when she was put in there, they're going to know what the basically chain of custody was on that vehicle and who had access to it, who was moving it around. That's going to narrow down, the people that probably knew at least that, even if they didn't know what happened, at least that she was likely in that vehicle. So I think it's important in that way, but it's not something that jurors, I think, have to physically see to get a sense of. I think that when they process it, they'll have that what they need.
Steve, we always wait patiently for your next post on social media to see what piece of the investigation you can share. Why did you want to share this information about the Tesla with the public? Are you hoping that somebody might have more information, can come forward? Why do you think it was important to share this publicly?
Listen, it's a good question. And as a private investigator, there's tools that I don't have available to me, like prosecutors or law enforcement have. So sometimes I'm dog whistling to certain people when I make these posts, right, to see reactions and whatnot, and to have people contact me. I'll tell you, every time I appear on shows or come out with some posts, I do get contacted by people that are important, right? Last week during the last 2 weeks, I was contacted by somebody very important to the case that finally was like, listen, I got some things I want to tell you. And so I do learn a little bit more. And, it's not putting these out there for the sake of putting it out there or appearing for the sake of just, making an appearance. It's telling some people like, listen, I know this part. And do you want to come tell me the rest, or do you want me to keep fishing around? And some people listen, have this information, and there are also some people are just scared to talk to law enforcement. They really are, and they finally come forward and say, "Listen, I don't really want to get caught up in this, but I think this is important to know," and that's helping us put these pieces together. But I will say we're at a point where 5 months, we're coming up on 5 months in a few days, and I don't know. It scares me that the case can't be made by now. That charges haven't dropped.
I want to ask you about that, what's going on with the grand jury in a second. No, and I hear you that people are contacting you. Maybe they're nervous, but also want to provide information because a lot of people are invested in this case. They want justice in some capacity for what happened to Celeste, and we still don't even know exactly what happened. As we've mentioned so many times on the program before, the medical examiner's records have been sealed, so we don't even know the cause and manner of death. One thing you mentioned last week was regarding this person, Asia, who is, I believe, a streamer of some kind. And as we talk about the Tesla, we talk about the movements of the Tesla, who picked the car up, where it was placed. Just to be clear, who is Asia, and what do you believe her role is with respect to the car and the investigation?
Asia is a model, a streamer. I think she does some styling too. And I think that she's done some styling work for David. She was out on tour with him. She was around a lot. She was definitely one of the people in his orbit. She was around quite a bit. I know there's a lot of speculation about relationships and stuff, and I don't have 100% clarity on that aspect of it. I just know that she was there a lot. And if anybody is going to have answers as to how David reacted when the news broke, hey, there was a body found in your Tesla when you were out on tour, she was there. I mean, I think those would be interesting conversations to learn about, just to see what reactions like, or what conversations were like, or did people already know, and this was bound to happen. I just feel that there's no way that there's not multiple people that knew at least that she was in that trunk. And I'll tell you what's going to be very important is the Discord server that David had, because there was a lot of chatter in that from the time it came out that there was a body found in the Tesla registered to David to the time that Celeste was identified, which was 8 or 9 days later, something like that. The time in between that, there was a lot of talk about, there was a lot of people that knew that that was going to be Celeste.
And look, it's interesting from a legal point of view. If there was a hearsay issue in terms of, well, what did he say when it came out that the body was there? There was more free reign to describe how a witness reacted to that information, whether or not he was surprised and whether or not he was shocked and things like that. This goes to a bigger issue that you mentioned last week. We talked about it a lot on Sidebar. We didn't have a chance to talk with you about it here on Sidebar. You did talk to me about it on my News Nation show, Jesse Weber Live, last week, but you were quite vocal on X. I think I said you were vocal on Instagram before. No, but you're vocal on X about the arrest of Neo Langston. So this is David's purported friend, this streamer who was picked up in Montana last week at his mom's house, apparently on a failure to appear as a witness warrant out in LA. He has already been reportedly brought back there. This has led to the belief that he may be testifying in front of a grand jury out in LA, right? Reportedly has been hearing evidence for quite some time. And this is what you said in part: the arrest of Neo Langston for failure to appear to give testimony, which are the exact words used by the sheriff's department when speaking with me, concerns me to a certain extent, assuming this arrest is related to the Celeste Rivas Hernandez case. Targets are not typically called to testify in a case. At the state level, target letters are not always required, but issuing a subpoena to a target without providing notice is extremely risky. A defense attorney would likely argue that any testimony was coerced. Had Neo received a target letter, he almost certainly would have retained counsel and invoked his Fifth Amendment rights. That makes me think that he is viewed as a witness rather than someone currently at risk of being charged. Did one person act alone in concealing Celeste's body? If this was a homicide, did a single individual act alone without a conspirator? I find that unlikely. This leads me to believe that Neo may represent a last-ditch effort by prosecutors, a Hail Mary of sorts, because they do not yet have what they need to fully make the case. They may be attempting to pressure him into cooperating, potentially by offering immunity. Is Neo the last hope? So Steve, just to break that down for a second, I hear exactly what you're saying. In other words, there's a possibility here that Neo may be involved in what happened to Celeste, and bringing him in strictly as a witness as opposed to somebody that the grand jury can issue an indictment against. I could hear your concern. Something I mentioned on my show, and I'll mention with you again, is there is always the possibility that, assuming for a moment that Neo and David are connected to this, he could be testifying against David, he could be testifying against David and another individual or another individual. There could be people, Neo might just have knowledge of something and not actually be a part of whatever happened to Celeste, right? That's still a possibility.
Absolutely, it is. But there is more. I think I'm looking at this whole situation a little bit broader than just the homicide. I understand the homicide is what we're looking for, but Celeste was trafficked. And listen, there's messages back and forth. They knew her age, and so it's not just that. Listen, there's sex crimes against this girl, and there's certain people that knew what was going on. There's certain people that gave rides to her back and forth, even to Lake Elsinore. And so it's not just the homicide for me. I just think that this is one of these things where we got to start standing up for these young girls that are just taken advantage of by these predators. And I hope it's not a situation where it's like, we can't make the homicide, we just can't get there with it and let it go, because there is other crimes, whether it's concealment of the body, whether it's anybody that helped in facilitating her to stay with David. And so it's not just the homicide. It's just everything that happened to Celeste. It's the whole breakdown of,
Have you learned anything more about Neo since the last time we spoke?
I haven't.
Current state or what's going on with him?
I honestly don't know. I don't know if I was just an assumption. I assumed that if it was to bring him in front of the grand jury, I imagine that probably happened quick. But then with the $60,000 bond, I mean, that could have been released by now. We don't know. I have checked, and there's no charges in the system. And I think he would have had to, been charged by now. But it's weird that there's a bond up. So I don't know what the bond exactly is for, unless they pushed his appearance off. It's all super confusing the way it's going on. And part of that's because, obviously, if it is grand jury and it's happening kind of in the darkness, and we're not privy to it, but there's nothing in the public system as far as charges ago. So
if you're right, and this is a last-ditch effort to get somebody on the hook for homicide here, and you put aside the charges, like you said, with respect to concealment of the body or whether there are sex crimes involved, why would the prosecution's case be at that stage? Why would it be arguably so weak? How is that possible? It feels like there would be a lot of evidence. I mean, you know this case better than anybody about the Tesla, the surveillance footage, witness statements. You tell me, how would it be possible that the prosecution's case for some of the highest charges could potentially be that weak?
I honestly, that's what keeps me up at night. I don't know, because these are not master criminals. They left a girl in a Tesla in the neighborhood and went on tour, and she was in that car for a very long time. I just don't know how, especially in the neighborhood that they were living in a vehicle that's covered in cameras. I understand it can be disabled in sentry mode, but I mean, in that neighborhood, how something wasn't captured or somebody doesn't know more. I don't know how they don't have that evidence. Now, I have heard that there's, one or two people in particular that I think it's been assumed have been cooperative, and I've heard still are not cooperating. Now that's just, rumor mill that I've heard from reliable sources, but I just can't believe they'd be that loyal to David. I mean, maybe it's because they have some more involvement, but I don't know. It scares me. It's been 5 months. If they haven't been able to lean on these people to get them the crack, if they haven't been able to find any actual evidence, then I don't know. I hope the case isn't, dead in the water as far as, the actual how she died,
And this is unusual in your experience that it's taking this long?
I think it is in a crime like this, where it's not like a super remote area and they found a person in a shallow grave or something like that. They found her in a vehicle registered to somebody that we find out that she was a runaway and was staying with at certain points of time. And I think it's going to be very clear. Prosecutors know where she was staying in those times in between where she was with David, but she was still a runaway. I mean, I know where that's at. And I think those people can fill in those gaps of, when did she disappear? When did she stop coming back to this location? And, as far as how long was she on? And also there's going to be questions of, okay, why didn't the alarm bells go off at that point? Like, okay, we haven't seen or heard from Celeste in a very long time, because Celeste was not truly a missing person. They knew where she was at. And there was a missing persons report, and that was kind of covering, I think, for her not going to school. But there was then a large gap of time where people should have been like, okay, something's gone wrong.
Steve, before I let you go, we got to go back to the idea of you're representing this client, right? This client who owns that property. What is your client thinking at this point? What does your client want to do with the information you have?
So his biggest concern is, I can tell you, first of all, my client is, the owners of the house, the husband and wife, and they're extremely caring, empathetic people. They have a child around the same age, and they're like, they can't fathom something like this happening. And the fact that something could have happened in their house or with people that were living in their house that they didn't even know were living in their house. It's not about the house for them, or it's like, if there's anything we can do, like, in other words, because it happened on our property, if there's anything we can do to keep this story alive, what they want to do is they want to make sure that the next big story doesn't come along and Celeste is forgotten about, and just, it's like, oh, there's been no charges. in that case. They really want to keep it out there and up front, and not just because it's a high profile case, but because to shine a light on this is happening. There's people that are predators are taking advantage of these girls, and these things happen. And there's people around these predators that are kind of co-signing that behavior. And this has all got to just stop.
Steve Fischer, again, really appreciate you coming on to give us the latest and your perspective and providing a little bit more clarity as to what may be going on behind the scenes. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Jess.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. You can also check us out on NBC's Peacock. We got Sidebar episodes out there too. If you want to follow me, X, Instagram, I got my News Nation show, Jesse Weber Live, Monday through Friday at 11 p.m. Eastern. Until next time, everybody, stay safe.